And just one more reminder, next week we start our gospel meeting. So Sunday through Wednesday of next week, Bob Pulliam will be here. We have a gospel meeting from Sunday through Wednesday night. So we have our flyer out there on the board, and we should have some extra ones there on the desk. You can also go to the website and print some if you need to send to friends and family. Hand out, post it wherever you like at your work or whatever. So, 1 Peter chapter 4. We didn't have a recording on the website, but I think we got down through verses 5 and 6 somewhere in there. We'll recap some of that, and then we'll try to get through as much as we can in chapter 4, maybe all the way to chapter 5. We've been going pretty slow through here, but we'll continue to progress through here. So I'm going to read the first 6 verses here, and then we'll start discussing 1 Peter chapter 4. And I'm reading from the New American Standard. Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In all this, they are surprised that you do not run with them in the same excesses of dissipation, and they malign you. But they give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For the gospel for this purpose has been preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. So, how was the people that were living before Christ? Were they able to obey the gospel? No. They weren't Christians, right? So how does Christ's death atone for their sins? Right. And so even those who, the Gentiles, even they had a law unto themselves, right? So when Christ died, even the people who had lived the life that they should have lived, even though they weren't after the cross, Christ's blood flowed forward and backwards. So the gospel was preached for them, this same purpose, to even those who are dead, so that they are judged in the flesh, that they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. Now, when we get into verse 7 going forward, Mark, why don't we have you and Ellen read 7 and 8, and we'll talk about these before we get into the other second. Well, Mark, you can just read 7 and 8.
But the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayer. And above all things, have fervent love for one another. The love will cover a multitude of sins.
Right, so the end of all things is near. So this was prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. So whether it's meant for the end of all things is near, meaning those things which are before the destruction of Jerusalem, or the end of time, does it matter when that is as far as how we should live? So if you know tomorrow at noon the Lord's coming back, versus you don't know whether he's coming back until whenever, which we don't, does it matter how you should be living? I mean, it does matter, but one versus the other. If I know he's coming back tomorrow, I'm going to live very fervently. But if I know he's coming back in the future, I've got time, right? Let me put it off. So we don't have that choice, and so we do have that choice, but the choice that we make should be the right one, meaning I should be living the way I should as a Christian always, regardless of when this is. So in verse 7, the end of time is near. Therefore, be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. So above all, love. Now, where do we read about love quite a bit in the New Testament? 1 Corinthians 13. So how can we show love for each other? If love covers a multitude of sins, I mean, what kind of love should I have? Should I have love for you, Christopher? Right? As my brother in Christ, should I show you that love? Right? Is there a checklist of things that I need to go through to do that. Right? I did this, I did this, I did this. So keep fervent in our love for one another. And fervent is that text. Is that something that you're studying on Wednesday night about zeal? You started the study about zeal and being fervent and how we can keep our love fervent, for each other. Let's get into verse 9. We're going to camp out here quite a bit in 9, 10, and 11. Ellen, why don't you go ahead and read 9, 10, and 11, and then we'll talk about those verses.
Each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak as it were the utterance of God. Whoever serves, let him do so as by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and domination forever and ever. Amen.
So, be hospitable to one another. And then there's a qualifier there. Without complaint. I mean, when you think about it, who invites somebody over and who's hospitable? That's just one way of showing hospitality. But who does something hospitable for somebody and then complains about it?
Because they may say, well, they just didn't.
Well,
or I had to take my time to do it, and you didn't want to. That's how some people could grumble.
Right, somebody who's checking hospitality off the list. One is I need to do this. I did it.
Well, it's not being truly hospitable.
Grudgingly, no. So we look at hospitalities. The word here, I think, is Philoxenos, philoxenos, or something like that. It literally means love of strangers, and is normally used in reference to kindness to those we don't know. But if we're talking about hospitality to our brethren, now we have a smaller group here, right? You can still have strangers within the group, right, by people you don't know. But let's say even a larger group, if you're a congregation of 200, 300 people, they're strangers, people that there's probably some people that are in a larger congregation that you never even see, much less, have an acquaintance with. So, being hospitable is it, if you have to go out of your way, Josh, to do something for somebody who's a really close friend, is that an extra effort for you to do that? No. The extra effort is doing something that you're not comfortable with, right? All of us like somebody to do something for us, right? So when we're doing something for somebody, being hospitable with somebody you don't know, takes a little bit of extra effort. It takes you out of your comfort zone, right? The people that you socialize with, that you're close friends with, you do activities with, those kind of things are easy. It's easy to have that relationship. But if you think back about when you first had that relationship, we all have the same relationship in Christ if we're Christians, and we should want to be with each other. So at one time, even the people that we're closest to, at some point, we weren't that close to, right? We all became acquaintances through the activities, as Christians, through doing things together. So being hospitable to one another without complaint, we shouldn't complain about having to be hospitable. Does anyone force you to be hospitable? How can we improve our hospitality? Mark? By practicing it, right? So, if you want to practice something, if you want to practice hospitality, right? So, how are you going to practice that?
Spend more time with the people that you want to show hospitality to. Let's say we're talking about membership of this local congregation. We spend more time in each other's company, and we have opportunity to do that. And we have people coming in. We have opportunity to provide provide them with a place or something like that. That's how you do it.
But it takes planning, right? Do you have people just pop into your house? Maybe you do sometimes, but you plan to be hospitable. It doesn't have to be at your house. Somebody shows up and you want to take to lunch after services, right? Any number of things. You have to make a plan to do that. So when we worshiped in North Carolina, there was different groups within the congregation, and within the groups they would say, okay, this group, if somebody comes in today, not to say that everybody doesn't greet somebody, but this group is planning to whoever comes in, this group is planning to either take them out to lunch or doing something with making some extra effort. And that was planned ahead of time so that you would set aside that time. So you didn't know when somebody came in, but there's no replacement for being kind to somebody and showing them that extra effort. It really makes an impression on somebody when they visit. For one, when you get a card, those kind of things that people have taken an extra effort to do those kind of things and being hospitable. Jack?
Well, and I mean, effort is a good word, but it also takes maybe a little bit of self-sacrifice to go out and purchase, a card or make a meal or, invite somebody over for games or whatever. I mean, but it's something that you should like to do and enjoy. I mean, without.
Right, and what we just read, that love covers the multitude of sins, and love is that sacrificial kind of love for our fellow man, where we're going out of our way to show them that we care for them. In verse 10, as each one has received a special gift, employ it serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. So what one special gift do we all have? Did we all get? The gift of salvation through Christ. So each one has received a special gift. Employ it in serving one another as good stewards. So, and then verse 11, whoever speaks, it is to do so as one who is speaking of the utterances of God. Whoever serves is to do so as one who is serving by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Christ Jesus, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever. So all the things that we do in our service is to do what? We just read it. It's to glorify God. So the sacrifice that He made for us, employ it in verse 10. Employ it serving one another. So we just talked about hospitality in the verse before that. And now it's employ it in the special gift, this gift that we receive, this gift of salvation. Now, some receive gifts in the New Testament, right? They had gifts of speaking, they had gifts of prophecy, they had different kinds of gifts, right? Whether that's speaking about this gift or the gift, in my studies, it seemed to be more based on the special gift that we all received. We all received a gift, and that was the gift of Christ's sacrifice. Employ it, the gift, in serving one another. So we're all able to serve one another. Let's look at, Christopher, you want to read James chapter 4 and verse 17. Verse 17.
Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin.
Right. Is that scary to anyone? Right. I mean, we call that sins of what? Omission, right? We're omitting doing something that we should do, right? So, two ways we can sin. There's things that we should do that we don't do, and there's things that we shouldn't do that we do, right? So that's committing a sin, or sins of commission, or sins of omission. I had opportunity to do something good, and I didn't do it. And that's what this verse, James chapter 17, is. Therefore, to one who knows to do the right thing to do and does it not, to him it is sin. The first thing I think about, one of the examples of that, is the Good Samaritan, right? We saw a man beat up in the ditch, a Samaritan, and knew to do something, right? So how often do we do the same thing, where we see something, there's something I should do, and I do it, versus I see something I should do, and I just walk away, right? What we read here, that's sin, and to me that's really scary. I'm doing the things I should do. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. But where are those opportunities? We know we all have them, and we just talked about hospitality and being hospitable to each other and those kind of things. That we have an opportunity to serve. We have an opportunity to be hospitable, to do these kind of things, and we don't do it. So does that mean we have to have somebody at our house every day? No. But it means when we have the opportunity to do something and it presents itself, that we have the responsibility then to do it and not draw back from it and say, well, either somebody else can do that, or I don't think that I don't think that guy really needs it. So think about the Good Samaritan. He didn't go over and check the guy's wallet. He got robbed. He go, oh, you got a credit card here. Why should I go to the inn and put everything on my tab? Or let me wait till you recover. Let's check and see what's in your bank account. You got enough to cover it, then I'm not gonna worry about it. No, he went there and said, put everything on my tab, and I'll cover everything, all the costs for this guy. So that's sacrifice. Okay, let's look at verse. Let's go to verse 12 now. And let's go to verse 12, 13, and 14. So let's read. So Sandy, you want to read 12, 13, and 14?
Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which to try you as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's suffering, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you on their part. He is blasphemed, but on your part he is glorified.
All right, so in 1 Peter, have we been talking about suffering for quite a while now, right? We've been talking about a lot of sufferings, and here again we see the same thing. Share the sufferings of Christ. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you. So now at this point, this could be before the destruction of Jerusalem, a lot of the persecution that was, actually going on there at the time, which comes upon you for your testing. So, how are we tested again by sufferings? I mean, we've talked about this a lot, and just because we're talking about it again, I don't want to skip over this. But repetition. That's how you learn, and that's how we understand. But how are we? Let's talk about sufferings and maybe list several things that we can talk about here about suffering. So, for the trials that we go through our testing, those as though some strange thing were happening to you. So don't worry about. It's not like you shouldn't expect this, right? If you're serving God, we talked about this, last week before, but let's put some things here again. So what are some things that happen, whether it's your job, work, or whatever, because you're a Christian, things that you when we talk about that, we don't physically suffer like a lot of countries do, where you're worshiping God. If you're found out to be worshiping God, you can actually be, beaten, thrown in prison. A lot of the things that we saw even in the first century, but happen today in other parts of the world, we don't have those. But some of the things that can happen to us, Dave.
Well, making fun of us because we don't want to participate in the things in the world that they're doing.
Right, and we read about that. They find it funny that you don't run in the same circles that they do. So, so you said made fun of, but we can come up with some other terms for that. It's easier to write that than to write ostracize. So the people make fun of you, right? Or they now, we could be in that situation where, and some of us have been there before, where you're in some public place and you don't pray like you should, right? You're with other people, at work or whatever. And, you sit down to the meal and no one else is praying, nobody led a prayer or whatever, and you don't pray because the people around you are not praying, and you, for whatever reason, we've all been there. You say, I'm not going to pray right now. I don't want to stand out, right? And that's not the way we should be, but I'm sure we've all done that. And that kind of peer pressure sometimes can cause us to shirk our responsibilities, as a Christian. So what other kind of things can happen to us at work? Your boss asks you to lie or to fudge some numbers or do something like that, and you say, "I'm not going to do that," right? What can happen? See ya, or you're demoted, whatever. Just put job issues here. And sometimes, when we lived in North Carolina, there was a man was a vice president at, I think it was Philip Morris, one of the big tobacco companies. And I guess he finally got to the point, and you could say what you want. You shouldn't maybe get to that point, but finally got to the point where he said, as the vice president or whatever, I can't do this anymore because of the tobacco industry and the addiction and his Christianity. A lot of us, we might say, well, I'd make that decision a lot lower. I wouldn't wait till I got to the vice president. Well, he made the decision anyway, and to me, it just made an impression on me that even people can get to a point where they're not looking at my work is different than my Christianity, but at some point, he did say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so sometimes we have to make a decision. It might affect our family too, or our livelihood. We're going to have to move. We're not going to make as much money, but should not be my focus. So what are some other kind of sufferings that might happen? But to the degree that you share the sufferings in Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that you also in the revelation of his glory you may rejoice. So we want to rejoice by the sufferings, the things that are going on in our lives. We should expect that, right? Yeah. I mean, Janet's here today with a broken arm, right? Fractured, not broken, but it hurts. And she's here today. But I told Tina. I told Tina, I said, she's going to hurt at home or she's going to hurt here. So she'd rather be here. But that kind of suffering, you'd rather be here with the brother, and that's the reason that she's here, and I'd rather her be here.
Another is when maybe not taking a job opportunity because there's not a church close. There's people that do that, and there's some people that don't.
Well, so we always want to be where the faithful group is. Now we've been places where there's 2 or 3 people, so you can be faithful and still just be in an area where there's 2 or 3 people. But that kind of, to some people, that might be a suffering. I'm going someplace where it's my kids and us and another couple, and there's no other kids around, and to them that kind of suffering might be my children don't have any friends. But there's just a lot of different kind of things, and we've only listed 2, and maybe that's all we can think of this morning. Verse 14, so if you're reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed. So even if these kind of things happen to us, we're blessed, right? And that's what we're hoping to be. We're hoping to be Christians who are serving the Lord the way he wants us. And if anything else happens that gets in our way, then we're happy for that, because we're serving God the way we should. And even earlier in 1 Peter, we talked about verse 15 in some different ways. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in his name. So if you're suffering as a murderer or a thief or those kind of things, you should suffer for that, those kind of things, right? You broke the law, and there's some penalty, some consequences that you have to suffer for that. But if you're suffering as a Christian, then don't be ashamed for that. And we sing this song, I'm not ashamed to own my Lord. And we shouldn't be ashamed to own Christ as our master, because we want to glorify God. And hopefully that's why we're all here today. You know, we've got family visiting family, but I'm sure that you're here today, here in this building, because you want to glorify God. And Tina, same way. You're here, you have a new grandbaby. But the reason that you're here is not to tell us all about your new grandbaby, even though I'm sure you will. But you're here today to glorify God. That's why Janet's here today hurting. That's why we're all here to glorify God. And that's why, you know, we edify each other in our service here today. So let's go ahead and finish out in the next 15 minutes to see if we can get through 17, 18, and 19. And then next week, next week we have our gospel meeting, and we're not going to be in 1 Peter next week. We'll have some other material, just a handout for next Sunday when Bob Pulliam is here. So 17, 18, and 19, let's go ahead and read those two. You can share it.
For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel? Now if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and the sinner be? Therefore let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to Him in doing good as to a faithful Creator.
All right, so verse 17, for it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. So, you know, in reading through this, you know, it could be prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, or it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And it begins with us first, us meaning Christians first. So what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? So we can just use the same. We haven't. There we go. So let's list some things that are going to happen to people who don't obey the gospel. Number one, eternal death, right? I mean, that's the ultimate, right? Eternal death. So, what will become of those who do not obey the gospel? So, on this earth right now, those who haven't obeyed the gospel, I mean, what's happening to them right now? Are they drawing closer to God? Right? Right.
Without hope of heaven. Right.
So currently, even though they have, this is what will happen to them, you know, finally. But currently, there is no hope. Mark?
I know those are spiritual consequences, but there are physical consequences a lot of times to ignoring what God says. We have the culture that is consumed by alcohol and drugs and a lot of other vices that are slowly destroying them, and they either don't care or they don't see it happen.
Right, so just like sinful consequences or sin consequences. It's physical, right?
Right.
Now, does that mean as Christians that we don't have physical? No, but you're talking about people who are willfully sinning are causing things to happen in their lives because they're willfully sinning, right?
Well, right. You suffer adverse health consequences for doing it. If you had not done those things, you wouldn't be dead. I mean, that's something you can control. Now, there's a lot of things health-wise you cannot control. But there are things that you can, environmental things that you expose yourself to, that you wouldn't have to, but you choose to. Those are things that you could avoid.
Right, and this is, so what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel? So this is the ultimate outcome, right? Eternal death, right? Now, these things lead to this because these are the things that are happening while they're living. This is the ultimate thing that's happening here. So the question here then is, if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel? Well, obviously, eternal death. In verse 8, and if it is with difficulty that the righteous be saved, what will become of the godless man and his sinner, and the sinner? So we know that they're lost, right? There's no hope. And then verse 19, the therefore. And because of that, therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. So it all comes down to we want to entrust our souls to God in doing what is right and doing what we should do. So therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God. So we're placing our trust in God, right? If these people don't have any hope, what do we have?
We do have hope.
We do have hope, right? They don't have any hope, and we do have hope. So, because we have hope, is that one of the reasons that you're here today? I mean, would you be here if Christ hadn't died for everyone? No. Where would you be, Mark? Doesn't matter, right? Right? You could be anywhere doing what a lot of people out there in the world are doing right now. But do a lot of people out there know necessarily that they don't have any hope? They should know, right? But a lot of people are not spiritual at all, right? I mean, to them, they kind of look at their lives like we would look at a dog, right? When I die, I die, right? And it's over, like Rover, right? And it's so without having the hope of heaven, none of us would be here. And what happens when we lose that focus? What happens? We're not drawing any closer to God. I mean, Tony's not in here, but I think that's what his lesson on is this morning, is drawing closer to God. And how can we draw closer to God? We can think about those things from the zeal lesson. I think that's where part of that came from. And Tony said when he was reading through that. But and in verse 18, and if it is with difficulty that the righteous be saved. Why is it difficult for the righteous to be saved? I mean, Christ died for all the righteous. Dan?
In part, this goes back to what we had Christopher read earlier, right? Talking about the omission and commission, right? That there's a lot that, Christ died for you, therefore, you have a lot of responsibilities what you're going to do with that sacrifice that was made for you. It's a tall standard to live up to, and it's not just avoiding trouble, right? There's a lot of things now that you're going to tap into that and use that as your hope. Like if you're going to carry that name, you have a lot of things that you need to be doing for however long you have. Right. And that's why it's a hope and it's not a surplus or it's not like it's in the bank and
Right.
I can choose to do things at this point. So
not a guarantee, right?
Right.
So, as Dan mentioned, so because it's difficult to live the lives we do as Christians, why don't we just go buy some property up in Montana, out in the middle of nowhere, and just live the rest of our lives there, and then we don't have to worry about anybody interfering with us, and we can just not worry about sinning, lusting, anything. We can just be by ourselves and wait till live that life.
We're spreading the gospel doing that.
Right. Who are you going to spread the gospel to, right? I mean, who's going to be able to edify you, right? who you're going to be hospitable to, right? Dan?
We made that point before, why would we not totally isolate ourselves from the world? And all these things that we've said are true. The others that we can look back to the Old Testament, that's not that far off from how the Israelites were supposed to live, right? They were supposed to be separate from the nation. They weren't supposed to integrate, all these kinds of things. And yet, even in those circumstances, we see they still had all these same kinds of problems, even within their own community.
Right. I want a king. They have a king. I want a king. Right? Oh, you have a king. Oh, now you don't want the king.
Well, it requires constant effort. We're to present our bodies a living sacrifice and always focus on keeping Christ first above all things in our life.
Is that easy to do, Dave?
No.
Every day you wake up, and every day we wake up, we hopefully thank the Lord. We thank the Lord when we close our eyes, and if we wake up the next day, then we'll be thankful for it, and then we want to live, as a Christian should live. But every day is the struggle. I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone would raise your hand and say every day I've got it, I've got it nailed. I don't have any problems, and I know exactly how my day is going to go, and I'm going to be tempted, and there's no issues that are going to happen in my life. I'd be surprised if anyone would say that. But we have these things in our lives. We should entrust our souls to a faithful Creator. So knowing that God is faithful, and knowing that He's provided a home in heaven for us, that gives us hope, right? I mean, even the fact that we didn't hope that when we drove here this morning that there was going to be a building here, right? We knew it was here. We've been here before. We've seen it, right? But the hope of heaven is something we haven't seen, right? But we know and understand the promises that God provided to us. And so we're here not just on a blind faith. We're here because we trust that God has provided for us what He said, and if we're faithful, that we'll have that home in heaven. So, not next week, but the week after that. Well, I'm not sure. I think we may even have we'll have another preacher. I think Mark, your friend, may be preaching that next Sunday after next week, 2 weeks from today.
Right. We may have to move that back to the 1st of November.
Okay, but
yeah.
Right. The point is, the next time we start the class, we'll start in chapter 5, where the heading above chapter 5 in 1 Peter chapter 5 for my version has been serve God willingly, and going into an area of serving God willingly, talking about elders here. But as Christians, we should want to serve God, and hopefully that's why that we're all here today. We want to serve God. We're not here because we just check the box, and hopefully we wanted to see each other here, but we want to encourage each other, and hopefully we've been encouraged, by each other being here today. But those are all the things that I had this morning. We're a couple of minutes ahead of time, but I think we can go ahead and close the class. But we'll start in not next week, but the week after that. We'll start in 1 Peter chapter 5, so you can all read through that and be prepared for that class. Thank you for your participation.
The guy is busted. Yeah.